ChatGPT said, "The wind howled like a wounded animal, its fury tearing through the trees, stripping them bare. The rain came in sheets, a torrent of water that hammered the earth relentlessly. The sky had turned a sickly shade of green, casting an eerie pallor over the world as the hurricane raged on. It was a beast, a thing of nature's wrath, born from the depths of the ocean and hell-bent on destroying everything in its path. Nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing had prepared anyone. The man had been running for hours, fleeing the storm's chaotic, all-consuming advance. His chest burned, his legs screamed in protest, but he couldn't stop. Not when the storm was gaining on him, roaring like a predator in search of its next meal. The road had become a river, the floodwaters swallowing the asphalt, the current so strong it threatened to pull him under. He left behind his car, left behind anything that might slow him down. His only focus was survival. He didn't know what had driven him to take that particular path. Maybe it was instinct. Or just blind luck. But now, through the sheets of rain and blinding wind, he saw it, a dark silhouette against the chaotic backdrop of the storm. It was a structure, a small building or shed, half sunk into the earth, nestled in the crook of a hillside. He didn't have time to think. The howling wind was deafening, the storm a maddening roar that drowned out everything else. But he could feel the air shift, as if some force was waiting on the other side of that door. With his heart pounding in his chest, he stumbled toward it, feet slipping on the slick earth, fighting against the crushing pressure of the storm. The door was heavy, but it opened with a groan, as if it had been waiting for him. He rushed inside, slamming it shut behind him, the faint sounds of the storm outside now muffled, distant. The quiet that followed felt suffocating, unnatural. A sense of dread settled over him, even as his lungs struggled to catch their breath. The room was small, dimly lit by a few flickering lights on the walls. Shelves lined the corners, filled with things he couldn't quite make out in the half-light. The air was cold and stale, and there was a strange, metallic scent that lingered in the back of his throat. He didn't have the time or the energy to investigate. Not now. The storm would pass, but he needed to regroup, to catch his bearings. His mind was already racing. Could he stay here long? Should he wait until the worst of it was over? And then what? He turned toward the back of the room, searching for something, anything that might tell him more about where he was. And then he froze. In the far corner, at the farthest edge of the dim room, there was movement. Slow, deliberate. A shadow stirred against the far wall, just at the edge of the light, its form hard to make out in the gloom. His breath caught in his throat, and for a moment he thought he might have imagined it. But the movement came again, closer this time. Something or someone was there, hidden in the darkness. A soft sound reached his ears, something between a low murmur and a growl. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. His heart began to race again, the adrenaline flooding his veins as the seconds stretched into eternity. He reached for something, anything nearby, his hand gripping a metal rod that he pulled from the shelf. It was heavy, comforting, but useless against the unknown. The murmuring grew louder, more distinct now, though the words themselves were incomprehensible. It was a voice, but not a human one. The pitch was wrong, too deep, too guttural. A strange vibration seemed to hum through the air, vibrating the walls, the floor, his bones. He backed away slowly, eyes darting to the door. He could still hear the storm outside, though it was distant now, as if the winds themselves were unwilling to venture too close to the building. The hum of the air seemed to grow stronger, the tension thick enough to be felt physically. The voice, too, was getting louder, clearer. And then it stopped. There was an eerie silence, a stillness that pressed in on him from all sides. It felt wrong, unnatural. Every instinct in his body screamed for him to leave, to run, to get out before whatever was in the corner of the room made itself known. He couldn't stay here. not with whatever that was. But before he could move, the voice, low, gravelly, unmistakably alien, sounded again. It was louder this time, sharp with sudden clarity. "My fast ends today." The words sent a jolt through his spine, every muscle in his body tensing with fear. The voice wasn't just speaking to him, was speaking about something else. A promise. A declaration. But what was it? The man's mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Was it a person? No, it couldn't be. Whatever it was, it wasn't human. The strange growl of the voice, the vibrations in the air, the low, humming resonance that seemed to bend reality itself, didn't belong to anything he'd ever encountered. And then, just as quickly, the room plunged into total darkness. The lights overhead flickered out, leaving him in a pitch-black void, his pulse hammering in his ears. The storm outside, the hurricane's roar, was now nothing more than a faint murmur. He couldn't tell whether it had passed or whether the world outside had simply gone silent. But he wasn't alone. A low, slow scraping sound echoed through the dark room. Something was moving, closing in on him. His breath caught in his throat, heart pounding, and his hand tightened around the metal rod. Whatever it was, whatever creature waited in the shadows, he wasn't going to go down without a fight. But as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he saw it. A pair of eyes. Not human, larger, shimmering with an otherworldly light. And they were staring directly at him. Then, before he could react, a voice came again, almost a whisper. "Now, you're mine." The sound of something heavy hitting the ground reverberated through the floor, followed by a slow, deliberate movement toward him. His hand gripped the rod tighter, muscles tense, preparing for whatever nightmare was about to unfold. The creature, whatever it was coming closer. And with that final murmur in the dark, the man knew one thing. His fight had only just begun. The air in the bunker had changed. It was heavier now, charged with something unseen but deeply felt. The man could taste the tension, sharp and metallic, almost like blood in the back of his throat. His grip on the metal rod tightened until his knuckles turned white. The creature, or whatever it was, hadn't moved again. Not yet. The glowing eyes hovered in the dark. Two pale orbs that reflected his fear right back at him. He forced himself to breathe slowly, quietly. Every inhale sounded too loud in the thick silence. His heart was thudding so hard he could feel it in his palms, in his teeth. He tried to think, what could this thing be? A person hiding from the storm like him. But those eyes didn't belong to anything human. He'd seen animal eyes before dogs. Deer in headlights, even wildcats once when camping, but these were different. There was an intelligence there, a knowing. "Who's there?" he managed to whisper. His voice cracked. No reply. The silence stretched so long that he started to think he'd imagined it all. The eyes blinked once, slowly, and then nothing. They were gone. He didn't move. Couldn't. The blackness around him seemed to shift, breathing almost as though the bunker itself were alive. His mind raced. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Maybe the stress, the hurricane, the chaos outside all of it was pushing him past the edge. People hallucinated under stress, didn't they? He took a careful step backward, his foot scuffing against the concrete floor. The sound felt deafening. Then he turned, searching for where the door had been. But the room felt different. The walls seemed farther away. The air felt colder. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to move. Reaching out to feel along the wall for the door handle, his fingers brushed metal-cold, wet metal land. For a moment, he relaxed, but then he realized what he was touching wasn't smooth like a door. It was ridged, uneven, almost organic. He jerked his hand back, breath catching in his throat. He turned fast, swinging the rod through the darkness. It hit nothing. The air itself seemed to swallow the motion. And then, quietly, a whisper floated through the dark. "Don't run. You'll wake them." His blood turned to ice. He froze where he stood. The voice was close, now too close. It wasn't the same tone as before. It sounded tired, almost sad, but still not human. The words echoed through the room. Stretching and warping like the bunker's concrete was bending them out of shape. He wanted to ask who, but his throat wouldn't work. The silence returned, thicker this time. Then, from the far corner, a faint light flickered. Not electric, more like a glow. Soft, shifting, greenish-white. He moved toward it before realizing that he shouldn't. But curiosity pulled him, stronger than fear, for a moment. The glow came from a narrow tunnel leading deeper underground. He hadn't noticed it before. It must have been hidden behind the shelves or equipment. Now, though, it stood open, like a throat leading further into the earth. The light pulsed faintly, almost like it was alive. He hesitated at the threshold. The storm outside was gone, or at least it had grown silent. The bunker felt wrong, but out there was chaos, maybe death. In here, at least for now, there was shelter. He swallowed, stepped forward, and ducked into the tunnel. The walls were damp, smooth stone that looked half-carved, half-melted. Water dripped in slow, steady beats, echoing through the tunnel. The faint glow led him downward, twisting deeper into the ground until he entered a wider chamber. The room was filled with old machines, rusted panels, thick cables, shattered glass, some sort of forgotten facility. It looked military, maybe, but there was something else about it, something that didn't fit the age or design of the bunker above. Symbols had been carved into the walls, looping lines and spirals that seemed to shimmer faintly under the glow. At the center of the room was a large metal cylinder, almost like a capsule. It was half buried in the dirt and rock, its surface covered in the same strange carvings. The glow was coming from inside it, faint light spilling through cracks in the metal. He stared, unsure whether to step closer. His instincts screamed no, but another part of him, the part that had always been drawn to the unknown, pushed forward. And then he heard it again. "My fast ends today." The same words, the same voice. Only now it was clearer, closer, and it wasn't coming from the shadows. It was coming from the cylinder. He stumbled back, eyes wide. The voice had weight to it, a presence that filled the room. Every syllable seemed to vibrate the air. Something shifted inside the capsule. Metal groaned, dust falling from above. For a moment, it sounded like breathing. He looked around, searching for another way out. But the tunnel behind him seemed darker. Now, as though the light from the cylinder was the only thing keeping the void at bay. His pulse raced. He didn't want to be here anymore. He needed to leave, to climb back to the surface, even if it meant facing the storm again. But as he turned toward the tunnel, the whisper came again, softer now, pleading, "Don't leave me." It wasn't threatening this time. It sounded almost human. He froze. Every instinct in him was torn in two. He should run. He should escape. But something in the voice, something broken, made him pause. He turned slowly, watching the cylinder. A line of light split down its center, a seam. And then, with a long, echoing hiss, it began to open. The air filled with a faint hum. The sound of energy waking after years of silence. Inside, a figure shifted. He couldn't see it clearly, just a shape, tall, too tall, moving with slow, deliberate grace. The glow grew brighter, washing over the room. He shielded his eyes, squinting. When he looked again, the figure was standing upright. It wasn't a monster, not exactly. It was humanoid in shape, but wrong in detail. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, the faintest light running through veins like liquid fire. Its eyes were the same color as before, soft and unearthly. It didn't look hungry or violent, looked tired. They stood there for a long moment, just staring at each other. The man didn't speak. Neither did it then. Finally, the creature's voice came again, quiet and hoarse. I waited for the storm. It brings the living down here. It brings food. But I waited too long. The man didn't move. The creature tilted its head, studying him. "You're not like the others," it said softly. "You're awake." He wanted to ask what that meant, but the words wouldn't come. His throat was dry, his voice lost. The creature stepped forward. Its movements were slow, careful, almost gentle. It didn't seem to want to harm him. Still, he took a step back, his body tense, every nerve screaming in warning. "I won't hurt you," it said, its voice trembling. "Not yet. You don't understand what you found." The light in its body flickered faintly, like a pulse. "I was made to wait," it continued, "to sleep until they called again, but they never did." The world above changed. The storms grew louder. And now it trailed off, glancing toward the tunnel that led back to the surface. The faint sound of thunder echoed somewhere above. The man finally found his voice. "What are you?" he whispered. The creature's eyes dimmed slightly. "Forgotten," it said. The word hung heavy in the air, thick with loneliness. Before he could speak again, the bunker shuddered. A deep rumble rolled through the ground. Dust fell from the ceiling. Somewhere in the distance, a door slammed shut. The creature's head snapped toward the sound. "They're waking," it said quietly. "You shouldn't have come here." "Who's waking?" he asked, panic rising in his voice. The creature didn't answer. It turned toward the capsule, its body glowing brighter now. Outside, the hurricane's voice returned, a low, growing roar that built into a scream of wind and thunder. The bunker trembled under its fury. The man backed toward the tunnel. The creature watched him go, expression unreadable. "Run if you must," it said softly, "but the storm won't save you this time." He hesitated only for a moment before turning and running back the way he came. The tunnel walls seemed to close in around him, the sound of the storm mixing with something else, deep, rhythmic, pounding from below, as if the earth itself had begun to breathe. Behind him, faintly, he heard the creature's voice one last time, echoing through the dark. "Their hunger is older than the storm, and now it's awake." He didn't look back. He just ran. He didn't know how long he ran. The tunnel stretched on endlessly, twisting and narrowing, until his lungs burned and his vision blurred. His footsteps echoed off the damp stone, each one louder than the last. The air was thick with dust and something else, something that hummed faintly, like static building under his skin. He didn't stop until he saw the faint outline of the bunker door ahead, the one that had first saved him from the hurricane. He slammed his shoulder against it, shoving until it gave way, and stumbled back into the first chamber. The sound of the storm returned like a crashing wave. The wind roared, the structure creaked, and the world outside still howled with chaos. He bent over, catching his breath, trying to convince himself that what he'd seen in the tunnel was real and not some twisted product of exhaustion and fear. But he couldn't forget those glowing eyes or the voice that had followed him. "Their hunger is older than the storm." The words rattled around in his head like loose bolts. He grabbed one of the flickering matches from the shelf and moved toward the exit, half ready to face the storm if it meant escaping that thing below. But when he opened the door, he froze. The world outside wasn't how he'd left it. The wind was calmer. Yes, but the air was wrong. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still swirling with thick clouds that glowed faintly from within, like a pulse of slow lightning. The trees outside were bent, not from wind, but as if something heavy had pressed down on them from above. The air buzzed faintly, a low, vibrating hum that crawled through his bones. He stepped out slowly, gripping the lantern tight. His shoes sank into the soaked earth. There were no birds. No sounds except the distant rumble of thunder and that steady hum. He looked toward the rotor where it should have been, but half of it was gone, swallowed by mud and debris. The hurricane had torn through everything, but somehow it didn't feel like the storm had ended. It felt paused. Waiting, he thought about the creature's words again, about something waking. Maybe it wasn't just talking about itself. Maybe whatever it was sleeping with down there, whatever they were, had already started to move. A sharp noise behind him made him turn fast. The bunker door had swung shut on its own. He hurried toward it, pulling it open again, but the lights inside had gone dark. He called out nothing. The silence was so deep it pressed against his ears. He wasn't staying. He made up his mind right there. He'd find higher ground, wait for rescue, anything but go back inside that place. He started down what was left of the road, moving fast even though his legs trembled. Hours passed, or maybe it was less. Time felt strange now. The clouds overhead never shifted, just churned slowly in the same spot, glowing like dying embers. The hum in the air grew louder as he walked, vibrating through the soles of his shoes. Once or twice, he thought he saw shapes in the distance, dark figures, standing still among the trees, but every time he blinked, they were gone. Eventually, he reached a cluster of houses, or what remained of them. Roofs torn off, walls collapsed, cars overturned. The whole neighborhood looked abandoned. But one house, half standing, had light coming from inside, a warm, flickering light. Fire-elight. He hesitated, then approached. Inside, small fire burned in a metal barrel in what used to be a living room. The smell of wet wood and smoke filled the air. Two people sat by the fire, a man and a woman, both in soaked clothes, faces drawn and pale. They looked up fast when he entered, their eyes wide and wary. "Easy," he said quickly, raising his hands. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I just survived the storm." "I saw your light." The man stood slowly, holding a crowbar. His voice was rough. "You came from the bunker, didn't you?" The question stopped him cold. "How did you know?" The woman spoke quietly, her voice hoarse. "We heard it. The sound from underground. The ground's been shaking since the storm hit. You shouldn't have gone near that place." He stared at them, trying to make sense of their words. "What sound?" The man nodded toward the window. "Listen." He did. At first, he only heard the hum again, faint and steady. But then, beneath it, something deeper, low rhythmic pulse, like distant drums echoing through the earth. It came in waves, each one a little stronger than the last. The woman hugged herself tighter. It started 2 nights before the storm. Then the winds came. "My brother said the old military tunnels around here weren't just bunkers. Said they buried something down there, something they didn't want found." He told them about what he'd seen, the capsule, the creature, its words. When he finished, the room fell silent. The man lowered his crowbar slowly. "You saw it awake." He nodded. The man swore under his breath and looked toward the window again. "Then it's already begun." The woman's voice trembled. "You said it talked to you. What did it say?" He hesitated. That it waited for the storm. That others were waking. The fire popped, throwing sparks. The woman shivered. "They used to test things here. Before the base was shut down. My father worked cleanup. Said they found something they couldn't destroy. Tried to bury it. Said it wasn't from here." The man cut her off sharply, as if afraid she'd said too much. "Enough." Then, to the newcomer, he said, "If you saw it, it saw you. It knows you're alive. You shouldn't stay near here." He didn't argue. He didn't want to stay either. But before he could speak, the ground beneath them trembled again, this time hard enough to rattle the windows. The fire guttered and went out, plunging them into shadow. From outside came a sound along, hollow groan, like metal twisting deep below the earth. Then silence. They all stood frozen. The man by the fire looked toward the door, eyes wide. "It's closer, what is?" He didn't answer. Instead, he went to the window, peering out into the thick gray air. The humming sound had shifted, no longer steady but pulsing, like a heartbeat. Then, faintly, they heard something else. Whispers. Not human voices, exactly, more like air moving through hollow spaces, shaping itself into words. The woman grabbed the newcomer's arm. "It's calling," she whispered. The sound built until the house itself seemed to shake. From outside came a flicker of movement, dark shapes sliding between the trees. Faster than anything that should have been able to move in the storm's heavy air. The man dropped the crowbar and backed away. "They're out." The newcomer turned toward him. "What are they?" But before the man could answer, the window shattered. A burst of wind and dust blew into the room, scattering debris. Through the broken glass, a shadow passed, tall, thin, and wrong, its outline blurred like smoke. For a second, he thought he saw a face familiar. Human even, but then it melted into something else, something fluid and unfinished. They ducked low, covering their heads. The woman screamed as the thing brushed past the doorway, the air around it bending like heat waves. It didn't attack. It just hovered there for a moment, whispering in a language that made no sense but felt like it should. Then it was gone, vanished into the storm. Silence again. The man by the window turned, his face pale as ash. "It's not alone," he said. "There'll be more." They didn't stay to find out. They grabbed what they could, a flashlight, a few bottles of water, and ran. The road stretched ahead, broken and flooded, but it was the only path left. The hum followed them. It was louder now, rising and falling like something breathing just below the ground. Every few minutes, a faint glow would flash from somewhere deep in the forest, followed by the soft echo of that same whisper. "My fast ends today." The woman stumbled beside him, breathing hard. "It's feeding," she gasped. That's what it meant. The man shook his head. Not just feeding, growing. They reached the edge of a hill where the ground had cracked open from flooding. From there, they could see the valley below the forest, the wrecked highway, the river cutting through. And under the clouds, faint but visible lines of light glowed beneath the earth, spreading outward from where the bunker sat buried. The woman covered her mouth. "It's spreading." He stared at the lights, his heart pounding. The glow pulsed with rhythm, like veins pumping through the earth. The hurricane hadn't just been a storm. It had been a key, something that woke whatever was down there as they stood watching. The wind began to rise again, pulling at their clothes and hair. The hum became a roar, and the clouds above them split with a flash of green light. He looked toward the horizon and saw something move beneath the surface of the valley. Not a creature, but a shape, vast, shifting. The storm wasn't over. It had only changed form, and somewhere, deep underground. The voice whispered again, softer now, almost tender. "You brought me back." The ground shuddered beneath their feet. The three of them, soaked, breathless, trembling, stood, frozen at the top of the hill, staring at the glowing veins of light spreading through the valley. It looked almost beautiful from a distance, like the earth itself had been laced with electricity. But they all knew beauty had nothing to do with it. The glow was alive. It pulsed in rhythm, slow at first, then faster, like something beneath the soil was taking its first full breath. The woman was the first to speak. "It's moving toward the river," she whispered. "It's following the water." The man with the crowbar, now dented and useless, shook his head. "No, it's feeding from it. Every storm, every flood. It's been pulling energy from them." The newcomer's mind raced. The creature in the bunker had said it waited for the storm. If this glow was connected to a tand, it had to be, then maybe the hurricane wasn't just a natural disaster at all. Maybe it was drawn here, or worse, caused by whatever was buried beneath their feet. "We have to move," the man said. "The valley's going to go next. That light's burning through everything underground." They started down the other side of the hill, keeping low as the wind picked up. The air felt heavier now, every gust thick with moisture and static. The clouds above had taken on a strange color, flickering from gray to pale green, like lightning trapped inside smoke. They moved fast, following what was left of the road toward the ridge where the land rose sharply. The idea was simple: stay high, stay alive. But each time the newcomer glanced back, he saw the glow spread farther, swallowing fields, trees, and what was left of the town. Then came the noise. A deep rumbling, like thunder, but slower, more deliberate. The ground trembled, and from somewhere in the valley came a sharp crack, followed by the roar of collapsing earth. Dust rose high into the air, glowing faintly in the storm's eerie light. The woman stumbled, clutching her side. "It's opening," she said. The newcomer turned and saw it too, a massive split tearing through the valley floor. From that wound in the earth, columns of steam and light shot upward, painting the clouds above. He couldn't look away. Deep within that glowing fissure, something was moving, something enormous, shifting just below the surface. "Keep moving," the man shouted. They did. But with every step, the hum grew louder. It was inescapable now, filling their heads, rattling their bones. Sometimes it almost sounded like words, faint voices hidden inside the vibration. Not one voice, many. All speaking at once, whispering things that made no sense but felt like memories he didn't own. When they reached the edge of the ridge, they found an old observation tower, one of those wooden structures built decades ago to watch for forest fires. It looked ready to collapse, but it was the only place high enough to see what was happening below. The man climbed first, testing each rung carefully. The woman followed, and then the newcomer, the wind pushing against them as if trying to tear them down. When they reached the top, the world spread out in all directions, nightmare made visible. The valley was alive. The glowing lines had merged into a single massive pattern, spiraling around the old bunker-like veins converging toward a heart. The light pulsed brighter, then dimmed, like it was sinking with something below. And from the center, a shape began to rise, a dark mass breaking through rock and soil, coated in mist and ash. At first it looked like a structure, maybe the remains of another facility. But as more of it emerged, they realized it wasn't metal. It was organic, smooth, glistening, and impossibly large. The man gripped the railing so hard it creaked. "That's no bunker." The woman's voice shook. "It's a shell." The newcomer felt the truth hit him like cold water. The capsule he'd seen underground, the one the creature had come from, hadn't been the prison. It had been a piece, a fragment. Whatever was waking now was far bigger than anything he'd imagined. The creature's voice echoed in his mind again. "You brought me back." He didn't know what that meant until he saw the lights flicker across the shell's surface, forming symbols, the same carvings he'd seen on the walls of the bunker. They were glowing now, alive with energy. The creature hadn't been trapped alone. It had been connected to something, a part of something larger. And when he'd entered that place, when he'd disturbed its long sleep, he'd triggered it. The wind shifted, and a new sound cut through the storm sirens. Faint at first, then louder. Down below, military trucks were moving along the broken highway, lights flashing through the rain. Helicopters hovered low, their rotors beating against the heavy air. The woman exhaled shakily. They know. They're trying to contain it. But none of them looked convinced. From above, the clouds twisted tighter, forming a perfect spiral centered over the glowing fissure. Bolts of green lightning struck the ground, connecting sky and earth in violent flashes. Each strike hit the shell, and each time it did, the hum grew louder. "They're feeding it," the man said. "Whatever that thing is, it's using the storm to finish waking up." The helicopters drew closer. One of them opened fire, a stream of tracer rounds slicing through the storm. The bullets struck the surface of the shell, sparking bright flashes, but they didn't leave a mark. Instead, the shell seemed to absorb them, the glow beneath its surface flaring brighter with each impact. "Oh, God," the woman whispered. "It's not just alive, it's learning." The newcomer couldn't take his eyes off it. The creature he'd met underground had said it had waited for the storm, that it needed it to awaken the others. Maybe it hadn't been talking about its kind, it had been talking about this. Whatever this colossal thing was, it was ancient, buried long before any of them existed. And now, the hurricane, the chaos, the energy had all been drawn here for one purpose. The earth rumbled again, stronger this time. The observation tower swayed dangerously. Splinters cracked from the supports below. The man shouted for them to climb down, but before they could move, a blinding light exploded from the valley, washing everything in white. When it faded, the world was eerily quiet. The storm clouds had frozen in place. The rain had stopped midair, droplets hanging suspended. Even the wind had vanished. The woman whispered, "What's happening?" Then they heard it. A sound so deep it felt like it came from the center of the planete, low resonant tone that vibrated through every living thing. It wasn't just noise. It was a signal. A call. The man gripped the railing again, eyes wide with realization. It's calling others. The newcomer felt it too, a pressure behind his eyes, a pulse in his chest matching the rhythm of the hum. He didn't know if it was in his head or if the sound had become part of him. Down below, the shell split open. A long seam tore across its surface, spilling light like molten glass. The fissure widened, and from within, shapes began to rise slender. Shifting figures made of light and shadow, climbing out as if waking from the earth itself. The woman screamed. He couldn't look away. Each figure shimmered, almost transparent, their forms constantly changing, like they hadn't decided what to be yet. For a heartbeat, some of them looked human. Then they didn't. The light flared brighter, and the hum became a roar. The valley shook, mountains echoing the sound. The man shouted over the noise, "We have to go now." They climbed down, the tower swaying under the tremors. The air grew hotter, the glow behind them blinding. When they hit the ground, they ran through mud and rain and debris running without knowing where to go. Only that they had to get as far from the valley as possible. As they reached the edge of the forest, the newcomer turned one last time. The shell was gone now, replaced by a column of pure light reaching into the clouds. The shapes within it moved like shadows swimming through fire. And over it all came that same voice he had heard in the bunker, echoing across the storm, louder and clearer than ever. "My fast ends today." The earth split again, and the light surged outward, racing toward them through the trees. The air itself seemed to bend and twist, pulling everything toward the valley. The sound was deafening. They ran harder. The man grabbed the woman's arm, pulling her along as branches snapped behind them. The newcomer stumbled, but didn't stop, every muscle screaming. The light kept coming. The hum became a scream. And as they reached the ridgeline, the ground beneath them gave way. He fell through dirt and stone down into darkness once more, the roar of the awakening world following him into the deep. And somewhere far above, the storm began again. The fall seemed endless. Dirt and stones tore at his arms as he tumbled through the collapsing ridge. The roar of the storm and the blinding light above blending into one long, unbroken scream. Then, all at once, everything stopped. He hit something soft, not ground exactly, but a surface that felt alive beneath him, pulsing faintly, almost breathing. For a moment, there was only darkness. When he opened his eyes, the light was gone. The sound, the storm, even the trembling earth had all vanished. He was lying in a dim cavern, faintly lit by veins of blue light running through the walls. The air was warm and still, carrying a low hum that was familiar now, though softer like a heartbeat at rest. His body ached, but he was alive. Somehow, he'd survived. He pushed himself to his feet, every movement slow and heavy. The cavern stretched far in both directions, disappearing into mist. The walls weren't rock. They were smooth, curved, and faintly translucent, like glass fused with something organic. He realized with a chill that this wasn't just a cavern, was the inside of that thing, the shell or whatever it truly was. He was standing inside it now. The hum around him shifted. A voice rose within it, not spoken aloud, but inside his head. It was the same voice from beforelo.com, familiar. "You ran," it said, "but you came back to where it began." He turned slowly, scanning the cavern. "Where are you?" he called out. The glow along the walls brightened, forming shapes patterns he recognized from the carvings in the bunker. And then, from the far end of the chamber, a faint silhouette appeared. The creature? The one he'd met underground. It stepped forward, no longer glowing as before, its body dimmer, weaker. Its eyes still held that strange light, but now they looked tired. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "Whatever's happening up there, it's destroying everything." The creature stopped a few feet away, its expression unreadable. "It's not destruction. It's return. The world has forgotten what was buried here. You woke us. You completed what the storm began." He shook his head. "I didn't mean to wake anything. I was running from the hurricane. I just wanted to survive." A flicker of emotion crossed the creature's face, something that looked almost like pity. "You were meant to find this place. The storms have always led the living to us. They are signals. You think they come from the sea, but they come from below." The words sank into him like cold water. The hurricanes, their growing strength, their strange patterns, it wasn't just climate. It was calling. Each storm, a message from beneath the earth. He looked up, as if he could see through the layers of stone to where the valley had been. "What are you?" he whispered. The creature's gaze softened. "We are what your kind once were afraid to become. Long ago, they built us to last through the storms to protect the world that was dying. But we outlived their purpose. They buried us when they feared what we could do. And when they were gone, we waited." He felt the truth of it in his bones. These weren't monsters. They were remnants of something older, creations left behind when the world above moved on. The storms, the energy, the awakening, it was all part of their design. But why now? He asked. Why wake now? The creature's voice was quieter. "Because your world has begun to fail again. The oceans rise, the winds grow wild, and your kind still believes it can outlast the planet. But the earth remembers. It calls to those who can reshape it." He took a step closer. "You said your fast ends today. What does that mean?" The creature looked past him, toward the cavern walls that pulsed with faint light. "We have fed on silence for centuries. Now, we draw on the storm's life, the energy of change. But we will not take more than is needed. Not this time." He didn't know if he could believe that. The light that had spread across the valley didn't look like mercy. It looked like the end of everything. As if sensing his doubt, the creature spoke again. "You fear what you do not understand. Yet it is your kind that stirs the tempests, that tears open the wounds of the world. We only answer." He stared at it for a long moment. "Then why talk to me? Why let me live?" The creature tilted its head. "Because you listened. Because you looked beyond fear. That is enough to begin again. A deep rumble rolled through the cavern. The light brightened, casting moving shadows across the walls. The ground beneath them vibrated, but not violently, felt like a slow awakening. A heartbeat returning to rhythm. "What's happening?" he asked. The creature looked upward. "The others are going back to rest. The storm has spent itself. Balance will return. For now." He didn't fully understand what that meant, but part of him believed it. The fury outside had burned through everything, but maybe that was the point. Maybe the storm was never meant to destroy it, was meant to reset. The light dimmed gradually, and with it, the creature's form began to fade. "Wait," he said quickly. "What happens to me?" The creature smiled faintly. "You wake. You remember? You tell them." The words echoed through the chamber as its figure dissolved into the glow, leaving him alone in the fading light. The hum softened to silence, and for the first time since the hurricane began, the world felt still. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying on damp earth under a gray morning sky. The rain had stopped. The valley below was unrecognizable, flattened, quiet, washed clean. The river flowed through a new path carved by the storm. The bunker was gone, swallowed by earth and water. He sat up slowly, dazed, his body covered in mud and bruises. The woman and the man were nearby, alive but unconscious. He crawled to them, checked for breathing. Both were still alive. Relief hit him like a wave. The air was different now, fresh, calm. The strange hum was gone. In its place was the faint sound of real birds calling somewhere in the distance. Life had returned. He looked toward the horizon where the shell had once been. There was nothing left of it now, just soft mist rising from the valley floor. It was as if the earth had sealed its secret again by the time help arrived. A rescue team following the old highway, they found only devastation and silence. No one could explain what had caused the quake-like storm, or why the soil in the valley glowed faintly at night for days afterward. Scientists called it storm residue, a reaction of minerals and static energy. No one believed anything else, but he knew better. When he was released from the hospital days later, he drove back to the ridge alone. The sky was clear, the air warm, and the world looked impossibly normal again. Yet standing there, he could still feel the faint pulse beneath the earth. Steady and patient. He thought about what the creature had said. "You wake, you remember. You tell them." He didn't know who them meant. Maybe everyone. Maybe no one. Maybe the world didn't want to hear. But as he looked out over the valley, now filled with mist and sunlight, he understood the truth of what had happened. The storm hadn't just been a force of nature. It had been a warning and a promise. The hurricanes would come again someday. The world would change again. And maybe, when it did, people would finally listen. He turned away from the valley, the wind brushing softly against his face. For the first time in a long while, it wasn't the howl of destruction he heard in it. It was the quiet breath of something ancient, resting once more. The storm had ended. But the earth was awake, and somewhere deep below, in the silence beneath the world, a voice whispered softly, like a memory fading into the wind. "My fast ends today."